all hear me? You know, the French have a wonderful saying. They say that being candid is always at your own expense. But I guess that the speakers today will be very much candid because in the first place, we're among friends. We have Minister Situ, who's the Minister of Finance of Zambia. We have Diamantopoulou, who's also my former boss. We have an intellectual superstar named Greg Mills. And we have a rising star called Mwanawasa, who is the Chief Policy Advisor of the President. So we're gathered here to consider Zambia, which is a country not merely at a crossroads, but this would be far too cliché, but rather at a point of gravitational, let's say, tension between the weight of its past and the velocity of its potential. And of course, we're not here to ask whether growth or recovery is desirable. That's axiomatic, I guess. But to examine what recovery truly means when applied to the anatomy of a state. So before getting directly to the topic, I want to ask Minister, what's your take from Delphi Economic Forum?
Thank you very much indeed, and it's a pleasure to be here. My take is as follows. First of all, we came here and listened to the number of statements on how Europe can realign. And this realignment has come about, or the need to realign has come about because of the changes that has taken place in America. Listening to a number of people since we came, the questions on the minds of so many people is, who are we going to trade with now? We see problems in America, and that is a big market. So where are our next markets? And speaker after speaker, they talked about how they're going to develop markets in Asia, in Latin America, and other places. But what I found to be very interesting, hardly anyone talked about how they are going to develop markets in Africa. And Africa is the continent of the future, with a population that is going to be more or less similar to that of China. And here in the Balkans, no one wants to talk about Africa. But I want to tell you that you are being left behind. Why? Because China has a specific program for Africa in the name of FOCAC, with a budget of about $40 billion. The US has a specific program on how to engage Africa. Russia, the Gulf, even the EU. So I get surprised, is this the EU here of the South or the EU of Europe? But around Brussels, there is a specific program of how the EU is going to engage with Africa through the critical minerals and infrastructure. But here, there is silence. So I think that one of the takeaways is colleagues engage with Africa, and we have very specific proposals on how we can move together. By the way, I also want to say that on the African continent, there is a realization that the mode of engagement of the past, of beg and give, that has changed. It's changed from the point of view of the donors. It is also changed from our perspective because it has not worked. And therefore, what we seek to engage with yourselves is how can we invest, how can Europe come and invest more in Africa? Europe needs to invest into Africa because you need to develop these new markets. You need to develop these new markets. The Africans are plenty in numbers, but we don't have buying power. But the buying power is going to be created in the same way that buying power was created in China. How did that happen? Europeans, Americans invested into China. What did that do? It raised the income levels of China, Asia, and today, those continents are the biggest traders with the rest of the world. The same thing can be replicated in Africa. Come and invest in Africa, the buying power is going to increase, and we are going to buy more from you, and these are your next markets if the market in America is getting complicated. And finally, I want to say this, especially for this region. You have been flooded with illegal immigrants. Partly politics, yes, but partly economic. The only way to solve this problem of illegal immigrants is to create jobs in Africa. So investment in Africa creates markets for you, but on top of that, it automatically solves the problem of illegal immigrants. So this is my takeaway from this conference. The Europeans need to be courageous. You need to be brave. Take on Africa. If you leave Africa behind, you'll be left behind because the rest of the world are engaging with Africa.
Minister, the message is clear. And I want to ask you also, how did you manage to go from unsustainable debt and growth stagnation to sustainable debt, transformation, and now growth?
Indeed, that is true. 2020, Zambia defaulted on international loans because we borrowed too much, and it reminded me of what happened here in Greece during the time when you had the, I think, Olympic Games. We did not shy away from recognizing that we have a problem. We recognized and said, we have a problem. We've overborrowed. So we did not waste time. We went to the IMF. IMF, let's work together. The IMF organized a meeting with the creditors. And with that meeting and continuous engagement, we've managed to convince the creditors to restructure our debt. And the debt, as we speak, is more or less 90% restructured. So Zambia has managed to sort out its debt problem. But on top of that, we said it's not enough to restructure the debt. We need to grow the economy. This is a continent where the population is rising fast. The population is youthful. We need to create new economic activities to be able to absorb the young people into jobs. That will also make ourselves financially sustainable. And this is why, as we grow the economy, it is important to have partners from Europe, from America, China, and so forth. You bring the investment capital, the economy grows, we will be able to buy more from you and not beg from you. We will be able to buy more from you. So this is a win-win situation, colleagues. It's a win-win situation of having more investments in Africa. Later on, I think we can talk about the specific opportunities that exist in my country on how investors can come and invest in the country. It's not charity. We don't want companies that come and lose money. We want companies that make money, because only when you make money will you be able to pay taxes, will you be able to employ people. So we are very clear about that.
Thank you, Minister. Anna Diamantopoulou is one of the very, very few Greek politicians who is directly linked to a major reform. And of course, I mean the Diamantopoulou law, which was a major reform on Greece's higher education. Also, you've served as commissioner in a most critical time, and you're active in Africa. You sit also on Greg's board. And my question is, what do you think is the first and most important institutional reform for a state to get back on track?
First of all, I would like to make a comment about Delphi Economic Forum. I think it is one of the few European organizations of this character that have opened their doors to Africa. Our first discussion with Simone was 8 years ago, and it was President Obasanjo that was our the first African leader who came here. And after that, Simeon Chomokos continuously brought African leaders, and we would like to thank Greg because he has supported us very much on this. And in this mess, in this global mess, I think Africa can give us a hope. Africa is the star of the future in many ways. Now, I come to the question, what is the most important reform? Of course, after a failure, you cannot prioritize and say you have to do this and then the other. There are so many things that a government has to put in place. So I'm not going to answer what is the first priority. I would like to answer what is the heart of the reforms. And the heart of the reforms, it is institutions and the rule of law. Because if there is no trust in society, you cannot do anything. So Zambia is a young democracy. African countries have new democracies, and we have to understand that things are not easy. We know very well we are a country of we're a democracy of 200 years old, and we know how many turbulences we have in our history. So I think institution building is the first and most important issue. And this is because when there is trust in a society, when young people understand that things do not work according to whom you know or to which party you belong, then they can trust the state, they can trust their society, they can work for their society. So there are opportunities for young people. There is attractiveness for investments, which is so important for a country which has economic problems. And I think it is the number one priority to have a productive civil service. This is always the problem. Civil services are not productive. They do not work. Why? Because they don't trust the state, they don't trust the ministers, and this is the main issue. So I would like to underline that, first of all, you have to fix trust, and that means you have to build on your institutions.
Thanks so much. So reform is not only about numbers being better, it's about legitimacy. And I'm coming to Greg to ask him what's actually reform and what's actually recovery, generally and in Africa specifically.
Sure, that's a big question. Thanks, Vasilis. Let me give you 3 figures which I think explain why Africa looks good and why reforms can deliver, and then I'll try and answer your question. And the 3 figures I have for you are 33, 95, and 14. Anybody have the winning number in the audience? Nobody have the winning number? So the 33 is the percentage of Africans that will make up the cohort between the ages of 18 and 25 by the year 2050. 1 in 3 young people will be African by 2050. 95 is the percentage of the platinum group of metals which are located in the African continent, which are among those metals that you need for your green energy transition, among other things, among many other things. Even if you don't have a green energy transition, you're going to need those metals for your continued use of diesel and petrol vehicles, for instance. And 14 is the distance across the Strait of Gibraltar. It's the distance between Africa and Europe. So we're not a long way away. We're not a distant conflict. We're not a distant thought. We're actually right on Europe's doorstep. So when it comes to thinking about reform in Africa, and to go to the Minister's challenge about how Europe should be a partner of Africa, it's absolutely in our mutual interest to be aligned. What does recovery look like? Well, recovery looks like obviously the stabilization of our finances, and reform looks like putting in place the conditions that enable us to use these young people in productive ways so that we can generate a demographic dividend rather than a demographic disaster in the years to come. But of course, it's not easy to reform and it's not easy to recover. Generally, in any state recovery process, a period of recovery is at least as long as a period of decline. And I think where Zambia has been remarkable is that Zambia has actually managed a very relatively quick recovery period over the last few years to be able to put itself in a position to be able to embark on an aggressive period of growth. What the world teaches us at the moment is that Africa actually looks like a pretty good bet. We have a young population. In fact, at my hotel here in Delphi, always a surprise, the two people running the restaurant, one is from Sierra Leone, the other one is from Nigeria. They are filling the aging demographic gap visibly in Greece and I guess elsewhere in Europe today. There is that prospect of partnership, but there's also the issue of high rates of growth. Africa, Zambia, this last year, I believe, Minister, grew at 4%. These are rates of growth that we have come to expect, that we need in order to be able to provide for our youthful cohort. But there's one last aspect of reform that we have to mention. We are a long way away from the Africa that people think about in terms of the export of instability and the export of poverty. More than 70% of Africans who are polled today, who are surveyed today, prefer democracy to any other form of government. The reason for that's very simple. They've experienced the other forms of government, and they've turned out, to misquote Churchill, to be worse than the democratic form, which is why they prefer it. We have quickly gone through our 3 stages of liberation. The first stage of liberation is from people who look like me. The second stage of liberation is from the liberators. That normally came between 20 and 30 years after the first liberation. And the third liberation is from the old monopolistic ways of doing things, the old, very statist, protectionist ways of doing things. And we are well into that third liberation currently. And that's what we mean, Vasilis, about reform. It's about breaking those old boom and bust, commodity-dependent cycles that we have become used to that don't provide for our populations.
Thanks, Greg. Chipo, how do you ensure, I mean, you serve in the government of Zambia at the highest level, you serve with the president. You're also daughter of a former president. And how do you ensure that recovery reflect the lives of young Zambians, of everyday Zambians, and they're not just numbers getting better?
Thank you, Basil. Just before I get to your question, I want to pick it up from where Anna left it, as it sounds like Zambia is actually on track in terms of reform of institutions. So 2 points to highlight there is that, and firstly, I should also state something that hasn't been mentioned yet, that both the minister and I represent a new administration in Zambia that came into office only just over 3 years ago. So we inherited this debt that is being referred to be restructured. And since we came into office, some of those reforms in place in terms of institution is the fight against corruption to build trust has been rejuvenated. And in the last Transparency International report a few months ago, Zambia had improved by 6 points. And that's a demonstration that we are seeing better institutions in terms of keeping people accountable and fighting corruption. In terms of public service reform, we are still a long way, but things are happening. The president recently introduced what we call the Presidential Delivery Unit, where I doubled in my role as policy advisor for 2 years as deputy head of the Presidential Delivery Unit to actually get the civil service to be more effective, work harder, and keep them accountable based on the promises that were made to the people. He also introduced another tool that is referred to as the Public-Private Dialogue Forum, which is almost like a complaint box for the private sector to deposit their issues that they are facing, legislation, policy that need to be reformed or changed, and they would be addressed by government. Beyond institutional reforms, we've had key sector reforms in the energy sector, both in petroleum and electricity, introducing open access, independent private producers of power, introducing also independent traders in the power sector. Just as examples, in the mining sector, we've had key reforms as well that have ensured a more stable environment mining regime, of which Greg was very instrumental in helping Zambia reset. We've also had key reforms in the agriculture sector, which is seeing bonded warehouses and receipt warehousing being introduced, reverting the strategic reserve to be a strategic reserve and opening up the market for our farmers to be able to trade and export in the regional area beyond the Zambian population, a growing population of 20 million. Zambia is actually land-linked with a population of 300 million around it as a market. All these reforms have made Zambia more competitive in terms of an investment environment, not just for the local business people and entrepreneurs, but also for FDI and international investors that want to set up in Zambia. You ask, Basil, how does this translate to young people? So again, one of the key reforms since the new government, the president introduced what we call Youth Week. It's an annual event that happens once a year where activities around the country are set up to dialogue and collect feedback from various youths around the country to deposit their needs and wants formally to government. And this Youth Week is culminated by what we call the Youth Indaba. Indaba in most African countries is another word for meeting. So this meeting takes place at the end of the Youth Week, where the president officially officiates himself and receives these submissions by the youth in the form of an action matrix of things that need to be done before the next Youth Indaba the following year, just to keep all of us accountable and build that trust with the young people. Now, this is not enough because, and because it's not enough, the new government again has proposals currently on the table to amend the constitution to get more representation of young people and women in parliament, so that these submissions from the young people are not just an annual 1 week in a month per year submission, but there's constant and consistent representation of youth engagement and representation of the needs and wants from the young people. And this amendment proposal is currently on the table, and it seems quite popular right now amongst young people. And I could say that I'm also a good example of the current government trying to get opportunities for young people, not only in business or entrepreneurship, but also in leadership. So I'm a good example in terms of youth and women, working at a very senior level in government and in a serious role as policy advisor. So being represented at that level, the youth and the young people can actually see themselves through the leadership, which is very important as a way of engaging young people. Thank you.
Can I just add, if I may?
Of course.
Just to say one thing to this audience, which is, I don't mean to downplay the challenges that Europe faces, but what you can hear from both the Minister and from Chipo is how exciting and dynamic these environments are, how much there is to play for, how things are changing very dramatically. There's no incrementalism here. We're not salami slicing our way to a different future. These are very large and substantial leaps of policy and of practice in terms of changes, which I think is why Africa is such an exciting place to operate.
Thanks, Greg. Minister, which are your top 3 priorities for sustainable growth in Zambia?
The most important thing that we are putting in place in Zambia to get to strong economic growth is to take advantage of the resources that Greg mentioned earlier on. In my part of Africa, that is Zambia, Congo, the DRC, and to some extent Angola, this is where you find most of the critical minerals that the world needs today. If you talk about Zambia, Zambia is the second largest producer of copper in Africa behind Congo DRC. And what we are saying to the world is that as we push for higher growth, let's take advantage of these minerals that are available. So what do we want from the world? We want you to come and invest into our mining sector. It is open. Copper, I think the experts say we will not have enough copper for the next 30, 40 years because of the changes to decarbonize Earth. So this mineral that the world wants, the mineral that the world needs, it is sitting right there in Zambia. So the first thing is, please come and mine with us. Win-win situation. The second thing that we are saying to the world, the old model of mine, take away everything, including the dust, the ore, we want that to change. Let's get more and more of value addition taking place in Africa. Let me give you a specific example. Our neighbors in South Africa, they have factories for BMW, the German auto cars. They have factories for Volkswagen. They have factories for Toyota. They have factories for Nissan. And of course, Mercedes-Benz, which are exported to the rest of the world. As we know, the green car now requires a lot of electrical motors. What is in the electrical motor is copper. So we have been talking to the Germans, we've been talking to the Japanese. These factories that you have nearby us in South Africa, please come and mine, but on top of that, beyond mining, can you make the electrical motors, can you make the batteries here, which you can ship to your factories just nearby, and then export. So value addition, that is a practical example of value addition. Why is that important? It is important because it comes back to my earlier point. We need to build the middle class in Africa. And the middle class, partly it will come from mining, but more it will come from the value addition example that I'm talking about. With that value addition, Europeans should not be scared that now the jobs of Europe are going to go to Africa. With the middle class growing, the Africans will be able to buy more from you because we shall have money in our pockets. So we'll buy more machines from you, we'll buy more cars from you, we'll buy more computers from you. That can only happen when investments, like in value addition, takes place, middle income rises, and then we'll be able to buy more from you. Then, of course, that security issue that I talked about, middle class rises, you have less of illegal migrants. So, in short, the priority is to get the economy to grow and grow and grow. On top of that, these mining activities that are going to take place, they will require a lot of supporting industries. One of those supporting industries is energy. We are quickly running out of energy because mining is expanding. But that shortage is, of course, also an opportunity. Please, Europeans, come and invest, and the reforms that we are talking about make the environment to be more conducive. That's what she was talking about. That is what she's talking about. So the opportunities are emerging. And finally, of course, to produce millions and millions of tons of copper, we need functioning rail system. The EU is working with us in Zambia, Angola, DRC, to construct a new railway line from this Central African part of Africa to the port of Lobito in Angola. We don't want to borrow money as government to do the railway line. We don't want to go and beg for money from any government to come and do the railway line. We are asking for the private sector. Those monies that you say go to America to fund the Americans, can some of it come to Africa to do the railway line, because the opportunities for profits are there. In short, growth, growth, growth. Europeans, come and invest. If the Arabs, the Chinese, the Indians, and so forth rush, come and do it. Don't come and point fingers at us and say, why are you trading with the Chinese? Why are you trading with the Arabs? Because the opportunities are equally open to you.
So, Minister, we need a paradigm shift from development aid to investments and strategic partnerships, right?
Absolutely. That's what we are talking about now. Movement away from begging and aid, more towards investment, economic cooperation, win-win.
And I'm going to ask a former European Commissioner what she believes, how she believes the international community should respond to it.
First, I had a thought that it is something that maybe forgot Simeon. I think it would be wonderful to have a small video of 3 minutes to show Zambia, because it's such a beautiful country. And there is the Lake of Victoria and the falls, and you cannot imagine how beautiful it is and how beautiful and warm people it has. So what are the 2 very interesting issues in this country? The first one is that it is one of the youngest countries in the world. I think the average age is 17 years old. Can you imagine it? 17 years old. And the second one is that it's a very rich country in terms of minings. I mean, cobalt and copper, and 70% of the exports are based on mining. We heard what the minister said. In order to produce wealth from these resources, you need your own people. You need engineers, you need economists, managers, workers with rights, workers who work in an environment with the health conditions needed, etc. So in Zambia, they have tried everything in the last 15 years. Privatize, nationalize, privatize again. What is the main issue is how the government can bring capital, can bring private capital, but in the same time to have its own people to work with it in the right way. So to be precise in what Vasilis asked me. I think that the cooperation with what we said support, on international aid, it has to do, first of all, with the priorities of the country, of the priorities that the government has, the local priorities. The second one is that whatever this support is, it must not create a dependency, because this is one of the biggest problems in Africa and in the past in Asia as well. The European Union, I have worked a lot as a commissioner with African countries at that time, but now there are many years ago, there are many different projects in place. And one of them has to do with education and health. And I believe that these are very important projects because these are the two first priorities, particularly education for young girls and for early childhood. The second important issue is the infrastructure. And there, the European Commission, there are some agreement with the USA as well for a railway, which is a very important one, a very important infrastructure. And then it is the act, the mineral, the raw mineral act. I think this is very important. I think that the European Commission and the European Union has always some problems because there is always conditionality. There is the European bureaucracy, who know it very well. The African countries usually complain that there is a lot of delay. On the other side, the Chinese are very quick. They have not a lot of conditionality. And it is always a challenge to choose to work with the Europeans, with the Chinese, with the Arabs. It is not easy, and I think that there's many times that the African governments prefer quick victories and quick results. But this is not always the way out, I think, because conditionality is very important, and conditionality has to do with democracy, with institutions, with investing in people, with environmental preconditions. On the other side, when you have just a cooperation with China, for example, and just have a bridge and nothing else, I don't believe that we have the added value that we need. So, in a few words, international aid and international support is a very complicated issue. Greg has written an excellent book, which is, the title is Expensive Property. And in this book, we can see how much of international support has gone just to corruption, to nothing. So it is important, and I think now we have the experience, and the minister has already referred to that African governments have the experience to be very clear that, first of all, they have to put in first place their local priorities, and the second one, not to be dependent by anyone, being it the European Union or the United States or China. Thank you.
You know, for those who don't know, Greg has engineered the reform project as advisor to more than 10 African heads of state, so he knows well about it. And I would like him to give us a non-negotiable for Zambian success in the next decade.
Sure. In 2 minutes and 55 seconds with some discount to allow Chipo to say something.
We'll steal 2 more. We'll steal 2 more.
Let me just say a couple of things as a segue to that. 700 million is the number of tons of copper that have been produced historically in the world to date. We have produced 700 million tons of copper all around the world since time immemorial. And that's the same figure that is going to have to be produced to enable a green transition in the next 15 years. So we have got to produce the same amount again as has already been produced. And that puts a different complexion as to what is required from Zambia, from the Congo, from other countries, if you want to enjoy your standard of living, for all the reasons that the Minister has said and more, you need to invest in that process. So it is fundamentally the enlightened self-interest of Europe and indeed the rest of the world to no longer see Africa as a charity case, but to see it as an investment partnership and investment opportunity. Let me just say one thing, and in an answer to your question, Vasilis, is it's very uncommon to work with politicians who have an extraordinary grasp of the issues as well as attention to detail. Politicians are often big picture people. They don't have the grasp of the detail necessarily. They find themselves in positions where they're put rather than they have specific expertise for that. This minister, if you mind me saying so on this platform, is completely different in that respect. This is a person with enormous humility and with enormous purpose and the attention to detail, who set about with a very difficult inheritance in reforming a country that was saddled with debt, that had very little in the way of prospects, whose major sources of foreign exchange, as Anna has referred to, were essentially involved in a fractious process of litigation against the government, and in literally a couple of very short years, took an enormous agenda and translated it down to a number of key things. We'll sort out the debt, we'll change the relationship with the mining communities because that was absolutely imperative, and we'll set thirdly about transforming our logistics environment. And each of those, as an answer to your question, Vasilis, is exactly what's happened. It's an agenda that would make most politicians buckle at the knees. But that's the agenda that reformers have to undertake and that this government in Zambia has undertaken, which is why, in my experience, it has been such a pleasure to work with.
Thank you, Greg. May I ask Sipo to close the panel?
Thank you. It's always difficult to close after such a...
Give us a quote or whatever.
Well, maybe I'll refer to an old adage by Albert Einstein, which most of you might be familiar with, that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expect things to be different. And that's the reformatory approach that our president has embarked on, President Hakainde Hichilema in Zambia, of reform, 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 changing the factors that have been holding us back to economic development in a really fast way, but also changing on the things that work well to make them even better. And I would like, again, I dovetail very well with Anna, to latch on what she was responding to us, to how Europe should respond. So in Zambia, one of the other reforms we quickly did when we came into office was to remove visa requirements for the entire EU and other over 100 countries. So if anyone is sold in this room and would like to come to Zambia tomorrow, you can get visa on arrival and you're welcome to invest in Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you, Chibo. You know, there's a very interesting interview of Dr. Kissinger to William Buckley Jr. back in the 1970s. And Kissinger said that the very scope of policy is to get some control over future events and never wait for a favorable accident. And I'm very glad that I'm seeing an African government doing exactly this. Thank you so much.